All right, welcome to this special event being co-hosted by the American Bar Association and the American Veterinary Medical Association in honor of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I'm Megan Senatori, the Executive Director of the Center for Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark Law School, and I also serve as co-chair of the ABA's Companion Animal Subcommittee. I'll be serving as one of your moderators today.
I'm Dr. Kendall Houlihan, an assistant director in the AVMA's Animal Welfare Division, and will be joining Megan as a moderator today. This event, Domestic Violence Protecting Pets and People, is designed to raise awareness about how these issues may present in practice for legal professionals, veterinary professionals, and other allied stakeholders.
Before Dr. Houlihan introduces our panelists, I'd like to briefly share some background about the inspiration for today's event. In February of 2025, the American Bar Association House of Delegates overwhelmingly adopted Resolution 504. A resolution is an ABA policy statement, and this one urges action to protect domestic violence survivors and their companion animals. Your webinar materials include a copy of the resolution and the 15-page report that details the importance of the human-animal bond and the proven link between domestic violence and animal cruelty. Just one statistic from that report is that up to 89% of domestic abuse survivors with pets report that their companion animals had been threatened, harmed, or even killed by their abuser. Survivors often delay leaving an abuser, or they're forced to leave their animals behind when they seek safety for themselves. And this is due to the lack of enough options for the safety and the well-being of the animals in their family. Resolution 504 calls for a number of things, but one of them is cross-disciplinary training on the link between domestic violence and animal cruelty. And that's what brings us together today. Judging by the number of registered attendees for this live event, which is more than 250 registrations, professionals are eager to learn more and to work together to help survivors and their animals. We are so grateful that you're with us today.
And now, please allow me to introduce our panelists. Dr. Amanda Bisol is a small animal practitioner who also holds a law degree and serves as an AVMA board member. Dr. Bethany Poe is the chair of veterinary social work educational programming at the University of Tennessee. And attorney Malia Brown is the chair of the ABA Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence and a professor at the University of Houston. In the pre-recorded video, you heard from Marie Carmen Garza, who is the chief legal counsel for the commission. She was unable to join us for this live event, so questions about her presentation can be directed to Professor Brown today. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. To learn more about the presenters and read their longer bios, please visit the course page on Axon and the resources provided with your webinar materials. This program is a collaboration between the American Bar Association and the American Veterinary Medical Association. It is also supported by the ABA Tort Trial and Insurance Practice Section on Animal Law Committee and Companion Animal Subcommittee, the ABA's Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence.
Thank you, Dr. Houlihan. This has been a team approach, and it's been so wonderful to work with our friends at the AVMA on this. So today's conversation will be a roundtable format. We encourage you to submit your questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please note that today's event is being recorded so that others can view the presentation who couldn't join us live. And finally, a brief note. Issues on this topic are complex and they're often fact-dependent. So today's conversation is educational in nature and it is not legal advice. And likewise, the views that are being expressed are those of the presenters and not necessarily the organizations that they represent. So to get started, we would like to see a poll of who is here in today's live audience. A poll will appear on your screen. Please respond and let us know what profession you are joining us from today. Make sure everybody has time. And we can go ahead and pull up the poll when everybody's had an opportunity. Put up the poll results, I should say. I'm not seeing them yet. All right, everybody should be able to see we have an abundance of attorneys, 53%, veterinarians at 8%, and veterinary staff at 1%. We have a lot of paralegals and legal staff, as well as domestic violence advocates. One thing to note is that we anticipated for the live event veterinarians with their clinical practice going on would be harder for them to join today. And so they are getting CE credit for both the pre-recorded presentation and this live event when they watch it back as a recording. So to start us off, I'd like to ask each of you, what is one thing that you wish every professional understood about the connection between animal cruelty and domestic violence? And I don't know who would like to go first.
I can start.
Thank
It
you,
looks
Dr.
like,
Bisol.
unfortunately, Professor Brown will be reconnecting back in with us soon.
I was going to say we're down one screen. I wasn't sure why.
Uh, so, in thinking about this topic, the main thing from my perspective for this is it doesn't necessarily look the way you think it looks. And it doesn't necessarily look the way it is in movies or the way it's reported in the news. So there's a lot of different ways that, and Dr. Poe and Professor Brown probably can speak more to the human side than I can. But this looks very different in very different circumstances. And so it's not always physical. It absolutely can be emotional, and the role the animal plays in that can be all over the place. So it can look like neglect, it can look like physical abuse, it can also look like taking the animal away from the victim, taking away the victim's control of the animal, refusing medical treatment for the animal. There's a lot of different ways it can look, and so that's the biggest takeaway I have to give people is that it's not always gonna be a broken leg or a burn, and that it's important for us to address it, and think about this issue even when it might look like something else.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive and great answer because I do think people think they're going to see one particular thing and they may see a complicated set of factors when they look at it in their practices. Dr. Poe, would you like to respond to that question, please?
Yeah, be happy to. So I wish every professional knew that, and no matter which profession you're in, that even if a pet isn't that important to you, it may be the most important thing in the world to that domestic violence survivor. So it's not true for every survivor, but for some survivors, they base their entire decision on whether to stay or leave around their animal. And if their animal is going to be able to go with them, if it's going to be safe. So it's not a small thing to make sure you're asking about the pets.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Professor Brown will be coming back to join us. So I want to ask you a follow-up question. Dr. Poe, you bring to this conversation a lovely perspective, which is as a veterinary social worker, and it's such a needed way to bridge the gap between the human and animal side. Can you share with us what training or support do social service providers need to better address the human animal bond in domestic violence cases?
Yeah, so a great place to start is with just including animals in our assessments. Do you ask your clients about their animals, if they have animals? And if they say yes, do you ask what support they need related to their animals? Uh, and particularly in domestic violence situations, knowing what resources are available where you are. And so, does your domestic violence shelter in your area, do they let clients have their animals with them? If not, what other options exist? Learning how to safety plan with pets in mind. For social workers and or other types of mental health professionals that are more clinically geared, there's also a lot of space for learning about how to work with clients who have trauma related to the treatment of their animals or having to leave their animals behind, and also working with perpetrators of animal abuse.
Thank you. Dr. Bisol, following up on that question, can you share a little bit about what the animals who have experienced trauma may need from the veterinary team?
Yeah, so I thought that was it's an interesting question that I think a lot of people have, and a lot of people that adopt animals assume that the animal had a bad relationship with prior uh, people. And from what I see, because I have sadly seen a few animals that have been subject to pretty severe injuries, that it's really up to the animal's personality, just like a human, and they don't have that same usually that same long-term trauma or distrust of the human because they don't necessarily associate it that way. It depends on the other relationships they had with that person. So I certainly, we see animals that may be head shy or may, you may need to reintroduce them to a lot of um, other interactions and more appropriate and healthy interactions with people. But a lot of times, animals that behave that way just never had that socialization to begin with at all. It wasn't necessarily that they had negative interactions with people directly. So, those are some things I definitely recommend trying to talk with the veterinary team about that and trainers about it if you have a pet that you're concerned about what their previous living environment was. And then if you are a survivor and you're worried about your pet because they were also a victim, then again, definitely work with trainers in your veterinary team to talk about what they think might work in that specific instance. So, I certainly have had some where the animals have benefited from anti-anxiety medication because typically the stress and anxiety comes from separation with the person that they're really connected with. And so, trying to make sure we're supporting that interaction and healthy however we can, because sometimes we have to leave our pets at home or we have to leave them boarding somewhere, trying to make sure that that's as low stress as possible. I think that's the biggest area where animals get worked up.
Thank you. And you may have seen Ranger is with me today. He's very low stress, as you can tell. He gets to be here. But um, Dr. Houlihan, if I could actually direct the next question to you, someone in the audience has asked they would love to see a map of which states are mandatory reporters for veterinarians and which websites or organizations you recommend for that information. And I know that the AVMA has that resource because I was looking at it this morning. So I wanted to direct that question to you.
Absolutely. So the AVMA works with the National Link Coalition, which is a group that is specifically dedicated to providing resources and education on this link between cruelty against animals and domestic violence. So they have a wonderful map that is updated regularly. So the most up to date place that you would get that information is looking at your specific state laws. But if you're looking at a place to start on the National Link Coalition, nationallinkcoalition.org is their website. And then AVMA also has a toolkit, and that information is provided there. Um, Professor Brown, welcome back. We can get you looped in. The question that we were asking before you lost internet was if there was something that you would one thing you wish every professional understood about the connection between pet abuse and domestic violence.
Sure. Well, first off, I'm really excited to be here. And I'm sorry if my computer is going slow or for some reason Xfinity just lost connection and I don't know if it's going to happen again. Um, and also, I apologize if I'm repeating anybody since I didn't hear anybody's answer. So, yes, one thing I would like people to know, I think, as a domestic violence advocate, one of the most common questions we get when we're trying to explain how dire a situation our client is in is, well, why didn't they leave if the abuse was so bad? And so what I would want other lawyers, judges, and just anybody who interacts with domestic violence survivors to know is that animal abuse is a huge reason why people will not leave an abusive relationship, either because they're concerned for their pet's safety, that the pet will be harmed. Or also there's a big psychological, emotional abuse behind it as well. And so that's a huge reason that people will stay in abusive relationships despite it being very dangerous. Also, there's this other concern that shelters may not allow pets. And so survivors might choose to stay in an
And at least for me, Professor Brown is frozen. Is she for others as well? So I'll finish what I think she was saying. And I think we maybe got her back there for a moment. So nationally, up to 20% of domestic violence shelters now do have some way to help a victim with pets to bring their pet either into shelter through co-sheltering or through another mechanism like a foster program. One of the things to point out in the resources material, which is in the Google Drive, there are materials from both Red Rover and a nonprofit that I co-founded when I was in law school called SAVE, Sheltering Animals of Abuse Victims. And there's a resource guide for building a shelter program in your own community. So the way that shelter program works, which serves Dane County, Wisconsin, is that it's a collaboration between SAVE, our domestic abuse agency, which is local, Domestic Abuse Prevention Services, and then the Dane County Humane Society. And we provide support for victims through a foster network. So that is one way that more and more communities are able to help keep people and their animals together. I also wanted to note that in the chat is the link to the National Link Coalition that Dr. Houlihan added. And then I added the link to the AVMA toolkit. And you will see in Appendix C has a great chart that has every state and what the mandatory reporting laws are for veterinarians in those states. And then there is a separate chart as well that provides additional context for that. So it's a really excellent resource for veterinarians and for lawyers who are advising veterinarians. Since it looks like we lost we have Professor Brown back. Why don't we go ahead and, Dr. Houlihan, do you want to do the second poll question? And if Professor Brown is back, she can then answer some questions following that.
Sounds good. So let's launch the second poll question. This is going to be directed at veterinary professionals. And so we're really just looking to see if we know that veterinary professionals in general will see 1 to 2 cases of suspected animal maltreatment a year. That's just an average. So some people are going to see more and some less. But if you suspected that a client was experiencing domestic violence, whether or not that happened in conjunction with um, yeah, so it looks like 3/4 of you have. So so happy that we are working together in this collaboration to hopefully get you more assistance in how you might respond to those cases that are not animal centric. So Dr. Bisol, just as a follow-up for that poll, do you have any thoughts on what the most common red flags might be, whether they're behavioral or physical, that a veterinary team would look for that might indicate non-accidental damage or abuse that would be potentially related to domestic violence?
So the biggest red flag that I see is a inconsistent history. So our history, for those that don't know, is pretty similar to all professions, is you're asking hopefully open-ended questions, trying to get the story as to why the animal might be there that day. And then, versus in law where you're getting the story as to why the client has come to you, what their problem is. So the biggest issue is that the history changes or it doesn't match what you're seeing clinically. And really, in these cases, particularly, it's important to listen to your veterinary team because there's often more than one person that the client is talking to in the veterinary hospital. And what we often have, whether even if it's not abuse, we often have changing histories between what is told a team member and what is told to the veterinarian. And the veterinarian then needs to interpret what might actually be true. Some of it is because the client may just not know the history very clearly, or they remember more as they've been sitting there waiting. But then sometimes it's because they are trying to hide what really happened at home, or they're trying not to. Yes, they're trying to hide what really happened at home. That's what's happening, and so they're often inconsistent. They may be giving one number of days or one telling of events to one team member and a different one to another team member. And that's the biggest red flag where you really need to dive into things more. And especially if you're seeing an injury, the other red flag that some see, but it's not always that common, is if you're seeing multiple injuries on the same animal that are different ages. So that's a big concern. Luckily, that scenario is not very common. But if you take x-rays of what's a new fracture and you see healing fractures, then that's a huge red flag that previous injuries happened. That's kind of a guarantee something was going on. But otherwise, even if there's various levels of healing of physical injury, external injuries, then that's a concern that more than one event has been happening.
Is there?
just a- oop,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
as I'm following up on that, if we talked a little bit about resources that veterinarians can get to know what their legal obligations are as far as reporting. How sure does a veterinarian need to be that animal maltreatment is occurring before they consider reporting their suspicions?
So that's a large ethical dilemma for each individual to decide where they feel comfortable within that very gray area, because each case is going to be very different. And I will say, from my experience, sadly, these cases are severely underreported. And I even don't report unless I'm really certain. And it tells, and I know I'm one of the highest reporters in my state. So, and I've only reported a handful. So I know, just based on the poll we already saw, that we know from the statistics there's a lot of it happening. And so I know they aren't getting reported. So my advice, I said this in the webinar as well, is to figure out what your chain of command is for reporting within your state governance, and have a direct contact uh, with from someone who's working for the state. So for me, from Maine, which is really nice, we have an actual animal welfare veterinarian, and I have her direct state contact information. And so even if I'm, like, heavily suspicious, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, then I can call her and talk to her on the phone, and it's really helpful, and then she helps me decide, "Okay, should I be filing an official report for this or not?" And so hopefully you can develop that relationship with someone, that way you have another opinion as to when you should be reporting, because they are difficult situations, and you often still want to maintain a relationship with the client because you want the animal to continue getting care. And you risk, once you make that report, they usually figure out who reported it, because often you're the only one seeing that animal. So it's definitely something to, you know be careful about, but also it's important to do it when it's the right time.
Yeah, and then for our other professionals, is there anything you'd like to add as far as the roles and responsibilities? So the the veterinarian, if they are suspicious, that is sufficient to start the process of considering how they want to respond to that. But the investigation and figuring out if it rises to the level of animal cruelty in the face of the law is outside of our purview. So, would you like to expand on that?
I can chime in just a little bit, as I used to represent veterinarians in veterinary clinics when I was in practice for 18 years. And my strong advice to all veterinarians is to have a relationship with legal counsel, because you may have a situation. Reporting obligations vary across the country. They are determined. They are determined by your state law. And so, for example, when I practiced, I was in Wisconsin. We have a mandatory reporting law for veterinarians, but it actually only applies to suspected animal fighting. So legally, there is one type of reporting obligation, but as Dr. Bisol explained so well, many veterinarians feel they have a professional or ethical duty and they want to report. And so, what is helpful in these situations, in my judgment, is to have mandatory reporting laws that provide civil immunity to veterinarians, so that when veterinarians make a good faith report, you're not reporting your client because they didn't pay the bill. It's a good faith report of suspected animal cruelty. There is immunity that protects that veterinarian from doing what I have tended to find when I was in practice most veterinarians want to do, which is to be able to report, but they're kind of caught in this legal quagmire. So that's just a little thought. And I don't know if Dr. Poe, if you have anything that you'd like to add.
So obviously I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
I'm a police worker. So definitely knowing what your state laws are, um, and knowing the wording. So, like, for example, in Tennessee, I'm going to switch over to the idea of child abuse reporting. Um, Everyone in Tennessee is a mandated reporter for child abuse and elder abuse. And it literally says if you have suspicions. So, what does the wording on your law looks like? So, kind of that burden of proof. And in talking to veterinarians throughout my career, it's not your job to determine whether this is abuse or not. That there are professionals that they do that, the animal welfare, your animal control, whatever it is in your state. So making the report when you feel like you need to make the report.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Poe. And Professor Brown, I see you back. Or do you have sound now? Well, because if so, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Yeah, give me while you can.
I love it. Do you have, so let's do another poll question real briefly, which is we'd like to ask the legal professionals in the audience who serve domestic violence survivors, do you regularly ask about pets in your intake? If we could do that poll, and then have some follow-up for Professor Brown. I don't know if I see the poll being launched yet. Oh, there we go. Oh, good. This is encouraging. 77% of the people answered yes. We got to get the rest of the group there. So, Professor Brown, what are subtle indicators that a legal professional or victim advocate might observe in a client that suggests a pet is being used as a tool, as coercive control, or in the power and control dynamics of domestic violence?
Sure. So some subtle indicators. So in terms of the intake, if you're asking questions in the intake, that's kind of where I would take my cues from. And so in terms of questions you might want to ask at initial intake, you'd want to ask whether there even is a pet involved, because some might not even think that's an issue that they can raise in a family law case. So opening up to seeing if there's pets involved. Um, and if so, if they want the pet to remain in their care, that at least opens up a an opportunity to discuss that conversation. And once they say there's a pet and they want them in their care, one of the best questions you can ask for anything is, well, why? Tell me more about that. And they can start to share maybe any concerns that they have about their pets. If you're asking about threat and harm to pets as well, that's going to get you to some indicators. And I think another one that we don't often think of is neglect to the pet as well. And so asking questions about who feeds the pet daily, who's taking them on the walks, is the pet outside for extended periods of time, and if so, why? Tell me more about that. Those can start to shed light on some subtle indicators that there might be something wrong in that situation. And then in terms of, I think the question was like subtle indicators that there might be some animal abuse, or the pet might be used as coercive control. Is if they're scared to leave the pet at home, right? Like if maybe you're suggesting that they leave to a shelter and their main concern with getting themselves to safety is their pet, that would prompt me to probe a little bit more about what is the concern about leaving the pet there. And so, yeah, it's all about asking the right questions.
Thank you for that. And I'd also like to correct the poll that popped up. I was excited about the 77%. Unfortunately, that was the statistic about veterinarians who suspected animal abuse. The results of the poll are now up. 42% of legal professionals who are in attendance today are routinely asking about pets during intake. So certainly we need to get that number much higher. Thank you for responding to the poll. Professor Brown, I have a follow-up question for you based on the conversation that we had when you were gone. Dr. Bisol was talking about the role of the veterinary team when they're trying to find out if there's suspected animal cruelty or if they have a client who they suspect may be a victim, having those difficult conversations. And I know that there are certain tips that in the domestic violence space you recommend, such as when you have that conversation with the client, don't have it in front of the person you think is the abusive partner. So, can you provide general advice, both to veterinary professionals, lawyers, and others, about how to have those conversations with domestic violence survivors through a trauma informed lens? What tips do you have so that we can be having productive, good conversations that are really sensitive to what's going on?
Yeah, definitely. So when you're working through a trauma-informed lens with survivors of domestic violence, I think one thing, to start off with is you want to understand their situation and you don't want to dismiss it. And so I feel like, a lot of people may want to tell a survivor to focus on their own safety. If you're in a client meeting, or if you're meeting with I'm not sure is it patient, but if you're meeting with the pet owner, um, you might want to focus on their immediate safety. But if their main concern is their pet, then it's really important to take the lead of the person who's in the situation. Something we always say in the DB world is that the client knows how to be the safest in their environment. And so if you're suggesting that maybe they don't go back home with the animal, but they're really insistent on going home, that might be because there's some sort of threat if they don't go home. And so always letting the survivor um, make the decision that they believe is best for them, and not asserting your own ideas, your own what you would do for yourself in that situation. And that also helps clients and survivors build autonomy, right? A lot of domestic violence is taking their autonomy away. And so allowing the client to tell you, this is what's most important to me right now, and this is how I want to handle the situation, is going to help them build that autonomy, and also build trust with you that you're going to listen to them and what matters. Um, Another thing you want to think about is safety planning as well. So if they are going to go back to a abusive relationship, kind of probing them to see, well, what are you going to do if there's an immediate need for you to leave the situation, right? Like, what can you do today to prepare for something that might happen in the future? So that could be kind of identifying temporary shelter before you need it, right? It would be bad to leave the situation and then find out that the shelter that you want to go to doesn't allow pets. And so maybe the situation is you go to a shelter and you have a family member take care of your pet, or a friend take care of your pet. So just kind of planning out the future before a situation gets that bad, making sure, especially in the vet's perspective, making sure that all the documentation for the pet is in the survivor's name, so that when it does come time to leave, there's not too many concerns about where the pet's going to go. Um, Also, I know in domestic violence, we encourage our clients to have like a go bag. If it's time that you need to leave the house immediately, already having a backpack packed with things that you need will make that easier. Making sure you include things for the pet in that as well. If there's medication, food, just so when it's time to leave, you're ready to do so immediately. So those are some things that come to mind immediately. I have a couple more that I'm happy to say now, or I can sprinkle in throughout.
Well, let's get the social worker's perspective on that. And in addition, Dr. Poe, what training or services do you think that social workers and other agencies need to better address the human animal bond in these domestic violence cases?
Yes, I totally agree with everything Malia was saying. so, um, so I think training wise, it just needs to become more of a norm. Is is the place to start is including animals in your assessments. Um, and like Crass said earlier, knowing about your resources, what's there, what's available. Um, and also I think really working to dismantle this myth of that a person's safety is more important than the animals. That um, obviously for the people that are here today, you don't agree with that because you're in this room probably. Uh, but as a general society, there's still kind of that attitude. But when we look at the research, a recent study from Pew Research Center came out not too long ago that about 97% of pet owners feel that their pet is a family member, and over half of those feel that they're a family member equal to a human family member. So we have to readjust our thinking, because the reality is if you are working with someone who feels that way about their pet, asking them to not consider that pet would be like asking them not to consider their child or not to consider another beloved family member. So really reorienting our perspective and making sure we're meeting our clients where they are.
That's great. Thank you. We did receive a question by email, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it's rather long, but the gist of it is, if a victim takes the animal with them when they leave an abusive partner, how do they defend against that abuser if the abuser tries to get the animal from them? Do you have tips? And this would be for Professor Brown or Dr. Bisol or Dr. Poe as well. But starting with Professor Brown, what are tips then to
Sure.
defend against that?
So, just to make sure I'm understanding, so the survivor leaves the situation with the animal, and the abuser is, it sounds like, harassing them to get the animal back.
Yes, that's my understanding of the question.
Wonderful. So, without a protective order in place or any documentation about where the pet should go, if there's harassment involved to get the pet back, I would call the police, right? And let them know of the ongoing harassment. I would definitely document it as well, so that you can use it in any future court cases. That would be that. That's the police are where I send my client for most urgent matters that are happening. So if they're trying to get the pet back and there's no legal documentation at all, that would be the first step.
And Dr. Bisol, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that one?
What I see more commonly, it's not quite the question, but is the abusers who keeps the animal, right? That's a big part of the problem we're talking about. The victim isn't able to take the animal with them, or but there are definitely lots of court cases of, the individuals fighting over ownership of the animal. And like Professor Brown said earlier, a big thing is if you can have the veterinary records and a history of the veterinary records being in your name, that is one of the biggest things that is used by the courts to prove ownership of the animal. So because they need some way to look for that. And I believe, Professor Brown, you might know, and this is going to be pretty state specific, as because these cases are growing in number across the country, as just like Dr. Poe said, where, pets are now considered a part of the family. So custody cases are growing for animals. And so the case law is kind of in development, but part of it is you have to find some way to show that it was ownership, that you actually owned the animal. And then part of it is prove that you cared for the animal. And then, they're starting to apply different tests. I know, I'm not sure where that's at, to try to show that, but that's a way where I think attorneys and even potentially the veterinarians can help the survivor uh, by making sure we have proof there that they can continue to have the animal.
Professor Brown, you had mentioned protective orders. Could you expand a little bit more on protective orders involving pets?
Yeah, certainly. So, just kind of starting at the beginning because I'm not sure what I missed when I was away. But a protective order is a document that you can get, a legal document you can get that says that somebody can no longer harass you, and if they do, it's a violation of the protective order, and that can have civil or criminal penalties. And so, a vast majority of states currently allow pets to be included in protective orders. So that's twofold. One, you can ask to have exclusive possession of your pet in the protective order. And then also, animal abuse can be used to show that there was a violation of the protective order as well. And so vast majority of states allow that. There's still a couple states who there's some advocacy to be done on that front, but most states do allow pets to be involved in protective orders. The challenges come, they're pretty nuanced, but there are a few challenges. One is, I worked with a rural population when I first started out in South Texas. And depending on the state, sometimes livestock and other farm animals are not included in protective orders. It's only companion pets. Um, and so that can be a huge disservice to people living in rural communities who view their, horses, for example, as and the pet that they would want to leave behind, or they would want protection for. And then also another challenge that comes up between states is whether actual harm of animal abuse needs to be shown or threats of harm would suffice. So there are some states where you have to actually show that the pet has been harmed to get them included in the protective order, where other states will just allow, or not just, but other states will allow threats of harm to suffice for a protective order. So definitely some advocacy to be done, but in terms of states that have protective orders and allow you to include pets, most of them do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Malia. And to direct people to Resolution 504, there is an overview in there of the states that do provide protections for pets in civil protective orders. I believe we're up to 42 states currently. So yes, as Professor Brown said, a little more movement that we need to do, but significant improvement since the first law was proposed in Maine. Dr. Bisol's state, you're the first state for 2006, the first state that allowed the inclusion of pets in domestic violence protective orders. A question for all of you. What has been your experience in working with law enforcement and judges in terms of how they respond to the concern about the safety of a pet in a domestic violence situation? I don't know who would like to take that. Are you having positives? Do they seem to get the issue? Do they not seem to get the issue? What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, I can lead us off here. I mean, just in terms of what I've seen with judges in domestic violence, it's hard for them. It's in my experience, it's been hard to convince judges to care about domestic violence if there's no physical abuse to a human involved. And so I've had struggle showing any sort of coercive control to a judge unless it amounts to physical violence. So whether that be animal abuse or any of the millions of ways that you can abuse somebody without physically hitting them, it has been tough. Um, and so I think it's really important to educate the judiciary when you can. And so calling in witnesses who can really help you explain the cycle of violence and coercive control. So I'm not sure how vets feel about being called to testify, because I know sometimes when I call therapists in, they don't like to come in either. But if you could, if you have a relationship with a pet or you have expertise, that could be really helpful in a case to help educate a judge. And then another component of that is to help your client to prepare to give really compelling testimony. I have found that if my client is compelling, they can really show how a specific abusive tactic harmed them and really compelled them to stay in the relationship. And a judge has found that very compelling. And so you can prepare them to answer those questions and really explain to a judge how animal abuse has really actually affected them. I find that can be really helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Bisol or Dr. Poe, do either of you want to weigh in on that question as well?
I can go next if that's all right, Dr. Powell. Um, yeah, this was a really great question that an attendee asked. Like this, a lot of people do not take this issue seriously. They do not take the concept of animal abuse and neglect seriously in general. And so this is something where it's going to be really specific to your location in terms of when you're talking about law enforcement, your relationship with law enforcement, because that's a local issue. And so, trying to work with your town. So speaking more to the veterinary team, it's important to have a relationship with your local law enforcement. You never know when you might need them. And it's important to be able to have able to call someone and not necessarily directly just to dispatch. So I would encourage you to try to reach out because that type of relationship is vital, not just for this issue. So I'm lucky in Maine, as already been mentioned, we're one of the top states for our animal welfare laws. We have really great ones, and then it's a matter of enforcing them, of course. So, but I would say in general, at least in my area, everyone takes it really seriously, which is really nice. The culture in my community takes this issue very seriously, and so I have had good responses, and in Maine in general, good responses to any animal abuse issues and reporting and involving law enforcement. In terms, I don't know where it kind of goes in terms of the court level. A lot of it is going to get settled before that level, actually getting someone to go to jail. Or sentenced for these issues is a totally different scenario, and the laws just don't support some of that, unfortunately. But, at least where from my perspective, what we see is we are able to get the animal out of the situation, and that is typically from the veterinary side. What our goal is we want the animal in a safer place, and that's usually something we can do in Maine. And it's absolutely involving law enforcement with those conversations because that is not your job as the veterinarian, and you will definitely get in trouble if you're trying to take control of that step. Your job is to uh, try to figure out if there's a problem in front of you and to treat that animal, and then if there's further issues to pass it on to the correct people.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's so helpful. And I think part of this conversation is why it's so valuable is making sure that everybody knows what their role is because everyone does play different roles in this. And I saw that you went to unmute Dr. Post. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to answer the question as well.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. It's definitely support both what Professor Brown and Dr. Bisol said. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, I think it really varies depending on who you're working with. I've had experiences with attorneys and judges who are very well educated and consider this a very important issue, and others that have been, why bother? So one thing that has been helpful is on the why bother side of it. If you can bring up what other states, other case laws, that kind of thing, say this is what they do. So for example, in 2018, we have a conference that we do, and one of the presentations was about an effort in New York where they were using forensic veterinary professionals to get evidence about animal abuse, and particularly in cases where the survivor did not want to file charges of domestic violence, they would go ahead and file the animal abuse charges so they could still prosecute. And they had data about how it was working. And I'm sorry, I don't have a name off the top of my head for that presenter. But it's just a good example of what can happen. So don't give up. Lots of room for education.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, as we are coming up on time, I did want to specifically ask Dr. Poe about veterinary social work because that is a relatively new area in social work and really bridges the gap across all these professions. So, if there was a single resource gap that you see trying to help a survivor and their pet find safety, what might that be, and what changes might be able to be made to sort of assist in closing that gap?
Yeah. So the biggest gap that I see is housing. So we're definitely making improvements when it comes to emergency housing, but there's the what comes after that. So when it comes to even if the pet was allowed in the shelter, now as we're transitioning to permanent housing, finding housing that either allows pets to begin with or finding housing that allows pets that your client can afford. So I admit from a policy perspective, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but we need our policies when it comes to pets to catch up to people's attitudes about their pets. Because as I mentioned before, most pet owners see them as a family member. So when they can't find housing to bring their animal, they can't afford that pet fee, we're splitting up a family. So in my opinion, that is the biggest gap right now.
Thank you.
I know in the Resolution 504 report, there's also a discussion about the link between homelessness and domestic violence. I believe just from memory, the statistic was 57% of homeless women report that domestic violence was the cause of their homelessness. So people think of them as two separate issues and they're really all related. So thank you so much for that answer. We are running low on time, but do you want to, Dr. Houlihan, there was another question I think that you were going to take.
Sure. So there was a question in the chat about resources for veterinarians, including how to best manage the information that they get from owners in the history, those interactions, their exam, knowing that this might turn into a case and be evidence. So wanted to call out that recognizing that encountering these cases of suspected animal maltreatment can be challenging, both practically, like that question pointed out, and obviously morally distressing. So AVMA recently expanded our resources to assist our veterinary professionals in preparing for identifying and addressing these difficult situations as they arise. So those resources do include information on how to treat a case, recognizing that your medical notes may eventually become evidence, and how to work, have this interprofessional collaboration in order to prepare, if that does go to trial. Resources also include things like creating a template for hospital procedures and SOP, so everyone on the team knows how you're going to respond, and having a list of local resources that might include human-directed services like domestic violence shelters that also accept animals, or temporary foster care for pets, if that's not an option, and domestic violence resources in general if your clients might need those. So those toolkits can be found at the link that's already in the chat and should be in the webinar materials. So as we close up, Professor Brown, Dr. Bisol, Dr. Poe, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all this valuable information today. And of course, many thanks to my co-host, Megan Senatori, and the American Bar Association for collaborating with the AVMA, and especially to all of you who made time in your very busy schedules to participate in this webinar. So for the veterinarians who are attending live today, if to receive CE credit, you can download and complete the certificate of attendance that will be sent as part of your post-event materials. And if you have any questions, just contact the AVMA Axon team at axon@avma.org. And again, I just want to thank you all personally for joining us and for all that you do in your critical professions, and for the human-animal bond.